Alright guys, I got a really terrifying story today. Do you know who Christopher Case is? Because if you don't, you're about to learn. And you're about to listen to his final voicemail. So I'm just giving you a warning on that. He was a music executive and a super superstitious guy. He didn't believe in paranormal stuff. But one day, he goes to a restaurant with his friends. And it was there that Chris met this lady. She was older than him, and she took very strong interest in him. Chris loved ancient Egyptian music, and so did she. And by the time they were done eating, she was like, "You should come home with me." Chris, on the other hand, was like, "Nah, I'm gonna have to pass on that." And then her personality completely changed. Her eyes filled with hatred, and she said, "I am a witch,
and I am going to curse you. You are going to die within the week."
Chris is like, Okay, I think I'm gonna leave. When Chris got home, things felt completely strange. He could feel the presence of something watching him, and he would see a shadow in the corner of his eye, but he turned to look, and nothing would be there. As he was laying in bed, he kept hearing whispering, so he'd stand up, walk through his rooms, and nothing would be there. Keep in mind, he lives at home by himself. So at this point, he's like, "I need to call someone." So he calls his friend Sammy.
I wish there was some way that people could hear what I heard in his voice and what he said. It was a living hell. He would try to sleep, but he had gotten to the point that he was not sleeping.
As the next day rolled around and Chris had not slept for 1 second, he goes into a store that sells religious items, and he just grabs a ton of crosses and asks if they've been blessed with holy water.
Asked where the crosses were, and I saw him collect quite a few in his hands. So I asked him what he was going to be using them for, and he mentioned at that time that he was battling some supernatural forces.
And then he buys books on spells and religion. He buys pounds of salt. Then he arrives back home petrified, but hoping that he can make some sort of impact. As he laid down that night, he just blocked out the whispering, hoping to fall asleep. And as soon as he did, he woke back up paralyzed. And standing over him was a huge figure. It leaned over and grabbed his neck. It stared him in the eyes and began to choke him. He was fighting to breathe, and it picked him up, stared into his soul, and threw him back onto the bed. He shot up, hoping it was just a dream. But as he felt his neck, it was extremely tender. And he looked down at his bed, and it was completely covered in blood. Every single one of his fingertips had a deep cut. The next day, he called Sammy and left her a voicemail. And you are about to listen to it. The scariest part about this voicemail is his tone. At this point, he has gone from petrified to accepting his fate. You can tell that he is expecting to die, and he has pretty much given up. Here is his last voicemail.
"Hi, Sammy. This is Christopher. Well, they just about got me. You know, they are trying to kill me. So whatever it is I do to defend myself doesn't work anymore. This is what it's coming down to. I'm not looking forward to tonight. It's serious. It's very serious. It's my life."
The next day, Sammy called the police. They came over and they found Chris. He was in the bathtub, laying in a praying position, dead. He was surrounded by candles and crosses and salt. And he had died of natural causes. His heart just stopped. All around his houses were these notes everywhere, and hundreds of crosses. When Christopher's family heard that he had died of natural causes, they were like, "No. Something happened, and we can tell now that it has to do with that witch." Although the mystery has never been solved.
You're not my grandson. You're a demon.
You're about to witness the real footage of the Ammons hauntings, and it's about a demon in a basement. And warning, because I'm not kidding when I say that pretty much everyone that has ever been associated with this house has been followed home by something evil. They get sick, they vomit blood, they try to commit suicide, It happened to the police, it happened to the CPS workers, it happened to all the families, it happened to the priests, and you're about to learn the story. Our story starts 2011 in Gary, Indiana, at this house. The victim to this house is Latoya Ammons. She has 3 kids, and this demon loves to torture them. When they went to bed at night, they would hear rustling in the basement. They would hear something creep up the steps, and it would stop at the door. They were too terrified to open it, so they would just let it stand there. Psychics and clairvoyants did readings on the house, and they detected that there is a portal in their basement, and that there is a powerful 12-foot tall demon. This is something that is not to be played with, and it may be near Satan himself. Before this haunting, Latoya's kids acted completely normally. You gotta think, some of them were just 7 years old. But now, as they sat in the living room, her son's eyes would roll back in his head, and his voice would get
deep and guttural.
Then her other son's eyes would roll back into his head, then so would her daughter's. And all 3 of them would start chanting. Anytime Latoya took the kids out of the house, they would become possessed and begin to attack each other.
My nephew looks up at my mom and says, "Get your hands off me, you old bitch."
You have got to understand, these kids didn't learn this behavior from anyone. They would become possessed and completely change. They were violent, they would act in new ways, and they would speak in different languages. And one night her daughter even levitated off the bed. But it gets even crazier, because they brought her son to the hospital. And it was there that they witnessed something absolutely terrifying. As Andrew sat in the hospital with his mother, his grandmother, the doctor, and a psychiatrist, he suddenly grew a crooked and evil smile. Grandmother turned to him and said,
So that's not Andrew, Toya. He had that evil smile on his face, and I walked up to him. I said, you're not my grandson. You're a demon.
As she walked closer, Andrew began to back up. And when he reached the wall, he began to defy gravity and walk up the wall. As everyone stared in disbelief, he went up farther and farther and farther till he was on his tippy toes. And then his feet hit the ceiling. And he walked and then did a flip, landing behind his grandmother. Everyone was a witness to this. The psychiatrist, the doctor, the grandmother, the mother, and they were terrified. Here is the CPS case manager that was a witness to all of it.
Standing like this, facing the wall this way, and went up the wall and came back around and stood back in front of us.
What did you do when that happened?
I left him. He could not remember doing it after he was questioned about it. He looked at us like, what are we talking about? He didn't even understand the question that we were asking him. We had no words to explain it because he didn't understand it either.
A few days later, the police and CPS go to the house again.
You haven't been here since the last time.
Everything pretty much intact when you guys left it?
Whose room is this?
The police officers go down into the basement while a priest and a CPS worker stay in the living room. And then they notice that there is oil dripping from the blinds. And it's not coming from the ceiling, it is coming from the middle of the blinds and going directly downward. So the CPS worker walks up to it and decides to touch it. She reaches out and feels it with the side of her hand, but she instantly recoils. She screamed in pain, and then her hand turned white. All of the blood was rushing out of it, and her pinky, which got the oil on it, would stay white. She was in an immense amount of pain. All throughout history, when fluids leak from walls, it is associated with demons. You will see it in every case. So, as the police are in the basement, they notice that under the stairwell, the concrete stops and it turns to dirt. So they grab some shovels and they start to dig.
Digging whatever, he had dug about 4 feet.
The officer?
Right.
They start to find items. They find one of Latoya's nails, find her underwear, and they find a pot from her kitchen. Something has been coming out of the basement at night, grabbing items, taking them back down, and burying them under the stairwell. Police also had an audio recorder running while they were in the basement. And as they listened back, they were terrified to hear a voice. Not only that, but Officer Charles Austin left that night. He drove 1 mile up the road and stopped at a gas station. As he was sitting there, he got a strange feeling, and then his radio turned to static, and a voice came over the speaker. It said, "Who in there?" Now, this video is getting pretty long, but I am going to do a part 2, and you will learn that everyone that stepped foot in that house fell under a curse. Terrible things would happen to them, not just at the house, but as they left. Cancer, gunshots, and Zach Bagans, the guy from Ghost Adventures, would end up purchasing the house. And the things that Zach captured on camera, some of the creepiest stuff I've ever seen. And this demon would tear their crew apart and have damaging, lasting health impacts on all of them. So yeah, like and comment for part 2.
Good luck.
Alright guys, quick warning before this video, because a ton of my videos are getting striked, and usually you can appeal, but for some reason I can't appeal mine. I just want to make sure that I put a warning before. And also, TikTok, I bleeped out all the cuss words, there's no violence, there's no gore, it's just a scary story. And I love you, TikTok, and yeah. So after all of the incidents with LaToya, Zach Bagans decides to buy the house. They all step inside, and then they notice that a car pulls up. So they walk out to meet them, and it is a lady named Mika. She brought all of her kids, and she was a previous owner. And she tells a story. When they lived in the house, she had a reoccurring dream that someone close to her would. And soon after, her brother, who lived in the basement, was So the family walks down into the basement and starts to pick up activity. Something kicks Mika in the leg.
Danny, kick me.
And they pick up an EVP. So the family is like, no, we are going to leave. So they do, but the kids are super freaked out. And then later they received a desperate call from Mika, her daughter attempted. She stabbed both of her and feet, mimicking Jesus on the crucifix. And while they're getting this call, strange things are happening to the crew. Zach gets overtaken by something evil, and he begins to attack people. You may think maybe he's just acting, but then they hold an EMF reader to his body.
It's magnetic, but...
And what was I giving off?
Maybe 8 to 12 million times normal.
What?
And at first, it only messes with Zach. But then every single one of them gets affected. They get angry, sick, confused, dizzy, and one of the cameramen wanders down into the basement and lays on the floor. At this point, many of the people in Zach's crew just quit. They're dropping out because they can see now that this thing is affecting everyone. So they decide to give it a break and spend some time away from the house. But things just get worse and worse. Zach's good friend Debbie reaches out to him, and she tries to make contact with this demon. Keep in mind, she lives super far away, so she pulls out a recorder and attempts to make contact. Immediately after she captured this recording, she would to a by her own husband. This news absolutely destroyed Zach. That night, Zach and the crew drive out to a hotel. They're standing in the hall about to walk into their room when one of their cameramen starts screaming. He starts sprinting up and down the halls, hitting the walls.
I want to go to the house, man. Come for you! Nothing. It's a... If there's anything here, it's a... Here? Huh?
And then he runs into the bathroom. From there, he starts to vomit. So the crew, they grab him, bring him into the hotel room, and sit him down. Then they notice that around his body is extremely cold. So they bring an EMF detector up to him, and it spikes to its maximum. And then the cameraman, which his name is Adam by the way, looks over at Zach. He is no longer himself. And he says,
like backed up off of him like I'm like a tower dryer. It's all staticky.
I'll find you.
Dr. Taff, who's doing the investigations with them, was in a hotel room upstairs, and he also fell extremely ill. He had to go to the hospital where they learned that all of his organs were shutting down. He has never had any health issues like this before. He would say that as he had fallen asleep that night, he could feel this entity lurking. He would hear rustling and then feel a sharp pain. And then he would realize that he was now on the floor. Now for the absolute craziest part of this story. Zach decides, you know what, I'm going to board up every single window, every single door inside of this house. But I am going to be inside. He wants to get to the bottom of this and face this thing. Little did he know, this wouldn't just be a scare. This entity would damage him for life.
Good luck.
As the last piece of plywood was nailed in, it truly hit just how helpless he was. As he crept through the house, he could feel this thing watching him. Every single step that he took felt like walking on eggshells. Something about to charge from one of the corners. The plan was to turn off the lights, but he was absolutely too terrified to do that now. So, waiting in anticipation and fear, he sat down. And everything was fine until 3 a.m. Zach starts to hear a female's voice when no one is around.
I just heard it.
Zach backed into a corner by the front door until he eventually worked up the courage to go to one of the bedrooms. It was there he sat staring directly at the door. And as a presence began to grow stronger and stronger, it became too much to bear. And then something from the basement walks up the stairs.
Back the up.
Zach felt a sharp pain in his eyes. He ran around screaming, holding his head, knocking things over.
God, my eyes. Ow.
He eventually left the house. He later found out that he had permanent damage to his eyes. He now has a condition called diplopia, and the only way to correct it is with surgery, which can permanently blind you. After this incident, Zach decides, let's just tear the house down. So they do. But he brings some pieces of it to his museum. And that is the story of the Ammons family. Pretty crazy. And let me just say, Zach is very brave. And I hope everyone affected gets better. Boy oh boy, do I have a story for y'all today. And for this story, I'm taking you to the deep woods of Newcastle, Virginia. It was here a hunter named Robert was scouting the lands. And off to his right, he noticed a clearing. So he looked, and there was a cemetery. And in this clearing, he could feel a very powerful presence. Something was watching him. Robert decided he would just quickly take a look, so he enters the cemetery. There was about 40 headstones, and fortunately he had his camera with him. He pulls it out and begins to snap pictures. In every picture that he takes, there is an orb. They just look out of place. As he's about to snap his last picture, he hears a twig snap behind him. And then footsteps approach closer and closer. Then he hears a whisper in his ear. His body gets covered in static electricity, and then a hand presses down on his neck. He is absolutely paralyzed in fear. And eventually, as this force lifted, he just took off. So that night, he makes a call to his friend John. He's like, hey dude, I just found this cemetery. You gotta come check it out with me because something weird happened to me. So they decide, let's both go back at night. Now keep in mind, this cemetery is in the middle of these woods. There is no electricity anywhere for miles. It is just pitch black dark. So the next night, Robert and John get together, they get their cameras, and they make the drive to the cemetery. As they stepped out of the car, they couldn't help but feel that this was a terrible idea. All around them is trees and darkness. And then they begin to hear footsteps coming from the tree line. But these footsteps are coming from every direction, and as they shine their lights, they can see things ducking behind the trees. They looked like dark black masses. So then John, who's very brave by the way, says, "Come on, that's all you got?" And then 3 loud stomps charged them. They both freaked out, and Robert pulled up his camera and took a picture. It's in this picture where we see the apparition of a lady with no legs. Here is the picture. Pretty much every picture they took that night, there were orbs, fog, which by the way, it's a clear night, and some of these orbs just look completely bizarre. After about 30 minutes, they decided that they should head out. They were having fun and capturing cool footage, but this is definitely dangerous. Later on, Robert would figure out that some of these gravestones are for the Confederates. But really, there is just like no information on this place. And there's not much information beyond this story. So Dad's gonna do it.
Are we speaking to Zozo?
Smells like rotting.
Alright guys, quick warning, because we're going to go into an actual case where a demon is present. The Zozo haunting of Darren Evans. And let me just say, demons are such vile, evil, weird creatures. In the realm of our existence, these are the worst possible things that could ever exist. I don't know why they're here or where they came from, but I do not like it. From what I've learned, the best possible thing you can do for yourself is keep positive emotions. Because demons like to latch onto anger, fear, anxiety, and in all the cases that I see, they latch onto people with those exact emotions. They don't like happy people. So yeah, that's just my advice, and don't let this video affect you. Alright, let's get into this story. In the early 2000s, Darren Evans, his wife Kathleen, and his friend Randy got a Ouija board. Randy came over and they walked upstairs into a room where they attempted to contact the lead singer of AC/DC. They placed the planchette on the board and began to call out. Everything went normally, but at the very end of the session, it said, "See you in hell." So they're like, that was weird, but whatever. So the next day, they decided to do another session. But this time, things got weird. The board said that Randy was cursed and he would die in a car crash. And later, he did. Regardless of this, Darren became obsessed with the board and began to use it again. And one night, him and his wife were using it when suddenly her eyes turned black. She realized that she was blind. She cried and screamed. The planchette on the board went back and forth from Z to O. But eventually, her eyesight would come back. But later that night, Darren was about to walk down the stairs. His daughter was at the bottom, staring up at him, when suddenly something lifted her into the air and she began to scream. She was carried all the way into their basement and pinned against a wall. So Randy and Kathleen were absolutely tormented by this thing forever. And eventually, they just moved out. Also, by the way, I wanted to say I reached out to Darren myself, and I'm going to try to do an interview with him, and I'll post it here on TikTok. So if you guys have any questions that you want me to ask him, leave them in the comments, and I will use the top liked comments. So now that you guys know the backstory, we get to the part where the Ghost Adventures team visits the house. Zach Bagans and the crew pull up, and they are clearly freaked out.
This is a real demon.
But not as scared as Darren and Kathleen. Kathleen is on the verge of having a panic attack because they haven't been in this house in over 10 years. And Zach wants them to use a Ouija board. So they step inside and the activity just starts immediately.
Weird in here, guys.
And Darren and Kathleen are having flashbacks. So everybody walks upstairs and they go to the exact same spot that Darren and Kathleen used the Ouija board 10 years ago. They sit down, they grab the planchette, and they place it on the board. They call out for Zozo, and as soon as they do, they hear footsteps walk up the stairs.
Are you with us?
Suddenly, the room goes cold. and a feeling of static electricity covers everyone's entire body. Then the feeling of dread completely takes over, and now the room begins to smell like rotting.
You smell that?
You feel? Yes.
I smell it. Something that smells like.
Smells like rotting.
After this thing walked up the stairs, the energy, the smell, everything in the entire room became so utterly disgusting that Kathleen is just gagging and coughing. And eventually, she just wanders off. But very soon, she comes back in. But she is no longer Kathleen. Her belt is undone, she's acting weird, her voice sounds different.
You just shut the
What was that?
Who's in here?
Kathleen.
Well, the way she said that.
And she claims to have spoken with Zozo himself. And while all of this is going on, the planchette on the board is going back and forth from Z to O.
Are we speaking to Zozo?
Mama. Zava. What's wrong?
So eventually they just close out the session, but it seems that it did not do anything, because the activity just continues. I've looked for more information on Darren and Kathleen just to see how they're doing now. I did find Darren's social media, and that's how I reached out to him, but I'm not sure how he's doing. But that's why I'm hoping to get this interview, so again, leave your comments and I will ask him. That's if I get it, but we'll see. And eventually, I hope I could visit this house. I know as I get bigger, I want to do some like actual investigating myself, so if I could go to that house, that would be cool. I know it is a terrible idea. But, you know, you only live once, and I feel like I'm pretty protected, so if you guys want me to visit the Zozo house, just let me know. Alright, I'll talk to y'all later. Have any of you heard the name Ivan McGuire? His last words were, "Oh God, oh God, oh no." So Ivan was a skydiving instructor, and in 1988 he was filming other instructors jump with their students. He would load up onto the plane with a backpack that had his camera gear inside. The first jump goes great. Ivan falls out of the plane backwards and films the instructor as they fall above him. After he hit the ground, he went to sit on a bench where he began to fiddle with his equipment. He was feeling frustrated about all the gear because it's just so big and clunky. And by the time the second jump rolled around, he got into the plane and everyone stared at him. They said, "Ivan, you don't have your parachute on." Ivan is like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that." So he runs out of the plane, grabs his chute, jumps back in. He's like, "Guys, I'm ready now. Sorry about that." So they take off, reach their altitude of 10,500 feet. Ivan walks to the door, jumps out backwards, and films the instructor and the student. Again, everything goes great. He lands safely and he walks over to that same bench. But this time he is thinking, do not forget your parachute. So the third jump rolls around, he grabs his gear, and this time he is confident that he has his parachute. He's got the backpack on and he is ready. They all get in the plane and rise up to altitude. And then Ivan's video starts. He's sitting on a little bench across from the other instructor, and the plane door slides open. That's their cue, so they all stand up, and Ivan is first. He brings his back towards the sky, takes a deep breath, gets ready, and then dives out. He's looking up, and after about 1 second of free fall, you see the instructor jump. They're falling, and after 5 seconds, the instructor pulls the chute, and they go flying out of frame. As rehearsed, Ivan flips onto his stomach, reaches back for his ripcord to pull his chute. Only, he can't find the ripcord. He's feeling around, and he's like, why is it not there? So he checks the other side, and it's not there either. So at this point, he begins to panic because the ground is getting closer and closer. He knows that he has no time. And in the video, you can see his panic grow and grow until eventually you see the moment that he has a realization. The only thing on his back was his camera equipment. Because the camera equipment was a backpack, he had accidentally confused it for the chute. And at this point, you can hear Ivan say, "Oh God, oh God, oh no," as the ground gets closer and closer, and he realizes that he has no chance. He has to wait and watch as he hits the ground at terminal velocity. An absolutely terrifying moment. He is in shock and cannot believe what's happening. Eventually, he made contact with the ground, and he was unfortunately deceased.